Well, good morning to all of you, those in the audience, those watching live on Zoom, and those watching this recording a couple of weeks or months from now. I'm Chad Stebbins from the Institute of International Studies, and so you want to be a diplomat. Careers in the Foreign Service. You're going to find out how to accomplish that this morning, or at least get some good ideas. I'm going to introduce the speaker on my far left, your right. She is Colleen Duke, Senior Foreign Policy and Diplomacy Services Officer at the Consulate General of Canada in Chicago. She has helped coordinate bringing Team Canada to Missouri Southern for a total of 7 presentations over 3 days. We had 2 yesterday, 3 today, and 2 tomorrow. Colleen's areas of focus include academic and cultural relations, public affairs, communications and digital media, agriculture policy, security and defense, and human rights issues. So I'm going to let Colleen introduce her panel, including one person participating by Zoom from Quebec. So Colleen, the chair or the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chad. Thanks you for coming out today, and those of you online. We may have someone else zooming in who is literally in transit on his way to Joplin right now. Um, Thank you to my colleagues for participating in the So You Want to Be a Diplomat panel today. I'm going to have you guys introduce yourselves. And I'm going to start online with Jean, who is in Chicago. Jean, can you tell
Yes,
us who you are, what your title is, and what your role is at your office?
yes, sure. So good morning, everyone. Bonjour. First off, thank you, Chad, for the invitation, and thanks, Colin, for organizing this panel discussion this morning. So I'm Jeanne-Lamy Belzile, and I work as Public and Governmental Affairs Advisor at the Quebec office in Chicago. I've been working at the delegation for 2 years now. And just maybe a few words about the office. So the Quebec office is like the official representation of the province of Quebec, the Quebec government in the Midwest. We cover 12 states across the Midwest. And the office is part of a broader network of representations abroad. Actually, there are 35 offices, Quebec offices abroad in 19 countries. And as Public and Governmental Affairs Advisor, I'm in charge of promoting new partnerships and collaboration in the areas of education, Francophonie, and with governments between Quebec and Midwestern partners. So I work with universities, Alliance Française, cities, legislators, regional forums, and also with Canadian consulate and with colleagues. So very nice to meet you all, and looking forward to this discussion this morning.
Thank you. Good morning, Earl Provo.
Thank you, Colleen. So my name is Earl Provo. I'm the Ontario Agent General, co-located in the Canadian Consulate in Chicago. I'm Ontario's political and economic representative in the Midwest. So I have 12 states of responsibility: the 2 Dakotas, Nebraska, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, Michigan, Kentucky, Missouri, Iowa. So my job is to promote Ontario, find partnerships for Ontario with different stakeholders, different states, and promote Ontario and political and economic as part of our political and economic agenda. So, and I'm really happy to be here.
Thank you. My newest colleague, Carson Markley.
I'm Carson Markley. I'm a commercial officer working for Ontario, also as a co-locator in the Chicago office. So I share Earl's territory and work to support him on the economic front of things. So I work in the nitty-gritty of helping Ontario companies export to the United States, or U.S. companies trying to invest and open new locations in Ontario. I'm relatively new, as mentioned, so I've been in this role for about 2-3 months now, but prior to this, I was working as a trade commissioner assistant at our consulate in Detroit, as a trade commissioner assistant, yeah.
Carson, I'm going to stay with you, as you are, no offense, other colleagues, you are closest in age to the students here. as opposed to the rest of us. So can you tell us a little bit about your professional background and your education background that led you to this role working with Earl?
Yeah, so I attended Youngstown State University and studied in economics for undergrad. And then I went and got a master's degree in international relations from the University of Richmond over in the UK. And then after that, I started the job hunt with a lot of unsuccessful endeavors at first, but eventually landed a job with the Bureau of Labor Statistics down at the Dallas office. So I started with the US government, working on some domestic stuff. And then I applied and got the Trade Commissioner assistant role at Detroit, which was a fairly entry-level job, mostly doing paperwork and government bureaucracy issues, and a little dip into trade here and there. And then I started working with Earl and got more in-depth into the trade aspect.
Thank you. Jean, you came to Chicago during the pandemic. I remember we went for lunch when none of us were in the office to introduce each
Yes,
other to what we do.
that was the
Um,
end of the pandemic.
yeah, it
Yes,
was.
it was still
Um,
good.
Tell us a little bit about your background, professional, educational.
Yes, sure. So I'm from Quebec City. So I studied at Laval University in Quebec City. I have a bachelor degree in economics and politics and a master degree in public management. And I did also a semester abroad in Aix-en-Provence in France. So when I graduated, actually, when I was a student, I worked at the Ministry of Education part-time. And after my bachelor degree, I also worked as economist at the Ministry of Environment. So this is how I started my career as a public servant. So I've always worked for the Quebec government, actually. So when I finished my master degree, I got a job at Retraite Québec. So nothing to do with international relations. Retraite Québec is a public organization that manages like Quebec pension plan, the public sector pension plans in Quebec. So I worked at Retraite Québec for about 5 years. Had 2 kids at that time, and then I moved to the Ministry of International Relations and La Francophonie. I was working at that time for the strategic planification. So yes, the mission of the Ministry of International Relations is to promote Quebec and defend Quebec interests at the international level. But at the time, my job was not necessarily related to international relations. So I spent about 1 or 2 years at this division. And then I moved to the Asia Pacific division. So I was in charge of promoting cooperation between some countries in Asia, like South Korea, Japan, with Quebec. And after that, I moved to the Africa and Middle East division. So the Quebec government has offices in Senegal and Ivory Coast. So I worked for 3 years at the African Middle East division. I was in charge of the relationships between West African countries and Quebec. I would arrange meetings for African ambassadors or ministries. I would help Quebec partners to organize mission to Africa. I would support projects and partners regarding West Africa and Quebec, etc. So that was a very good and formative experience, I would say. And I also had the chance to go to Senegal as part of the job, which was amazing. And after that, I got a new job as executive assistant for the assistant deputy minister in charge of bilateral relations at the ministry, which means that I was the contact person for all the desk officers in charge of a region at the ministry, and I was like the connector with the minister's office, so with the political staff. So that was also a great experience. I could see all the files, all the projects, and I could also work with political staff. And then I applied for the job in Chicago and moved to Chicago. So that's my career path so far.
Thank you. Earl, you have a long career storied career in public service. Can you give us a bit of your path?
Well, I don't know if that's accurate, but I am a political appointment. So the Premier of Ontario, Doug Ford, appointed me in June 2019, and I'm the first Agent General in Chicago. It's a new office, so Ontario has a network of offices around the world, and in the United States, I'm one of, so it's San Francisco, Dallas, Washington, New York, and Chicago. I'm political. My background is political. I did my undergrad at Glennon College, which is the bilingual college of York University, and I did my master's in political management at the George Washington University. I'm connected with the Premier because I was the Mayor of Toronto's Chief of Staff, Rob Ford's Chief of Staff, the late brother of the Premier, so we knew each other, and he knew my interest in Canada-U.S. relations and Ontario-U.S. engagement, and Chicago is very important to Ontario. The Midwest is very important to Ontario. Missouri is very important to Ontario, and so he asked me to take on his position. I did. I was reappointed in January 2022 because the Premier of Ontario thought the Americans hadn't suffered enough. So my appointment is up again in January 2025, and I've said that I would accept reappointment if they chose to do that. But I'm a political organizer. It sort of worked out where I'm just a professional political staffer, political organizer. And I've always had a big interest in Canada-U.S. relations, Ontario-U.S. relations. So I'm really excited to be in this very unique situation, this unique opportunity to enhance that relationship, the Canada-U.S. relationship, and more specifically, the Ontario-U.S. relationship.
Thank you. I'm going to jump in just for a little bit. So we have two official Canadian diplomats in Earl and Jean, and then you have two, Carson and I are known as locally engaged staff, both Americans. When he has experience at the consulates, we'll go to events and people say, "Where in Canada are you from?" really excitedly, and then I have to tell them I'm an American, and you just see their faces fall. I wish I had a dime for every time that happened. But I had no idea that international diplomatic positions were available to Americans with no Canadian background, but living in the States. So we will not rotate to different positions. We're not going to get shipped to Senegal or even Canada unless it's training. So locally engaged staff. The vast majority of the consulate office is made up of locally engaged staff. Of our team, Ontario is within our office. Quebec has their own space. There are about 24 of us in the consulate. The numbers keep changing. Our four senior staff are the Canadian diplomats, diplomatic passports. It's kind of like working for the State Department. They're assigned to Chicago for roughly 4 years, and then they rotate out, and then I get a new boss. So that's the consul general who heads the office and the heads of the trade section and the foreign policy section, which is my section, and there's one other trade officer. The rest of us are locally engaged. So mostly Americans, not completely. My one colleague, Francois, is actually a dual national, French and American now. He married an American. We have someone on the trade side of the shop who is French. We had a colleague who now actually works for Quebec, who is Moroccan. So these jobs exist. Don't have to necessarily live abroad, but I found this job by stumbling upon it, literally in an online ad, and actually we still put out the word that way. I worked in museums, as I think Chad had mentioned, for a number of years. My degrees are in art history and economics, which is like a whole different story. But I was looking for a new challenge, and while I didn't necessarily have the political science background, or I didn't study international studies, I had skills that I could bring to the job. So when I was working in museums, I was very good at doing programs. I was good at building relationships and collaborating, and I could bring that all to the position. I worked in a planetarium for 10 years, and so when I interviewed for the job, I was like, well, I don't know much about Canada. If you heard the talk yesterday when I was going in for my interview. I didn't know what the capital of Canada was. I was like testing myself on the way to the interview, thought it was Toronto. And while Earl might like it to be Toronto, it's not, it's Ottawa. So I like really knew nothing. But I worked in a planetarium. I figured out like space in a number of years. Like, how hard could Canada be? Infinitely harder. Huge country, it's people, but it's wonderful. It's changing all the time. It's dynamic. And I do get to work internationally, but also live in Chicago, which I love. And I'm doing a job that not only benefits my wonderful employer and the country of Canada, but also benefits the Midwest, which is my home. Carson, you've been doing this job for a little bit. You want to jump in on a LES perspective?
Yeah, so LES did not require any experience in Canada at all. I was born and raised in Ohio, and that was part of the reason I got hired at the Detroit consulate, because the Detroit consulate covers Ohio. So LES are usually hired because we have that local expertise. You know, I had contacts in Ohio, I knew the economy of Ohio. And that was what they were interested in, because the Canadians who are on rotation, they're brilliant, very well skilled, but they know Ohio, Michigan, Missouri, or any of the other states very textbook-like. They don't know it in the real world, sitting in the ground, experiencing it firsthand. And so that's where a lot of these LES examples can come into play, is having that local experience, those local networks, and unique experiences in different fields that may be of interest to the government. And although we're here prioritizing Canada, I will also say that the US government does LES also. So if you move to another country, whether it be Canada or the UK, you could do LES opportunities there and work for the US government as an LES in Canada. Or, you know, if you want to stay in the States, Canada is not the only country that does that here. Most embassies have some form of locally engaged staff. They use different government acronyms. So UK, France, Mexico are all also job opportunities if you're looking for that.
As well as the State Department, because you could join the diplomatic corps and go abroad. Earl, you want
Hello,
to jump in?
Colleen.
Oh, Aaron, are you on the call?
I am on the call. I have been on the call. Yes.
Ah, I'm sorry. So that is my boss, Aaron Annable, who is literally in the car on his way to Joplin. Sorry, Aaron, I didn't know you were on. Do you want to jump in here?
Yeah, sure. You guys have been doing a great job. So yeah, I'm joining you from Route 69 South. I'll be in Joplin in about 2 hours, I think. So yeah, I work with Colleen, Earl, and Carson at the Consulate General in Chicago. I manage the section that includes policy and political relations and public affairs. I came to my role here straight from our embassy in Washington, D.C. I was there for 5 years. I was the energy counselor, so I dealt specifically with energy issues, of which there are many between Canada and the United States. Probably the largest bilateral energy relationship in the world. I really enjoyed my time working in DC. I was on Capitol Hill quite a bit. That was a great learning experience. And before that, I actually had another assignment. I was consul at the Consul General in Boston, where I covered 4 of the New England states. I was actually acting Consul General for a year. So that was also a great experience for me. I do have a secondary role within our department, which is called Global Affairs Canada, equivalent to your Department of State. I'm part of a program called the Standing Rapid Deployment Teams. So that means I'm part of a duty roster. If something bad happens somewhere in the world and Canadians need assistance, I can be called up to sort of set aside my day job and be deployed somewhere. And actually, as we speak right now, I'm on call. I could be deployed to Beirut Obviously, situation there is pretty volatile, and there's an effort to help evacuate Canadians. Your government is most certainly undertaking similar efforts right now. So yeah, I could be called up at any time. So that's sort of an interesting side aspect to what I do. I did study political science at McGill University in Montreal, and I actually specialized in international relations. I basically have the job that I wanted. I did not get that job when I first graduated university, but I did find a job within the Canadian government, and eventually worked my way over to our global affairs department. So yeah, I've become a bit of a U.S. specialist because I've spent a lot of time on U.S. relations. It's all been really great experiences. And of course, I think our U.S. offices are some of our busiest in the world because we have so many partnerships and levels of collaboration and some issues as well. So yeah, that's my story.
Thank you, Aaron. Sorry I missed you on the first round. Earl, you grabbed the mic. I know you wanted to jump in.
Yeah, briefly. We work very closely with the U.S. Consulate in Toronto. So the senior people in the U.S. Consulate are Americans, and the U.S. Consulate in Toronto is a very big consulate. It's one of the largest, I think, in the Department of State. So those are all locally engaged staff. And just like the Canadian consulates, you know, the senior people are Canadian diplomats, but the rest are locally engaged staff. And so there are many opportunities, as Carson said, not just with Canada, but with other consulates and the embassies in Washington. So there is a career path and there is an opportunity there. And I have found, you know, I have 2 commercial officers and a commercial assistant. They're locally engaged staff. And when we've advertised for the positions, and it doesn't matter where I do it, I don't have a lot of applicants. I'm lucky, I'm very fortunate in the quality of people who do apply. And I'm very fortunate to have Carson working for Ontario. But it always astonishes me at how few applications or resumes are submitted. And these are great opportunities, great learning opportunities, great opportunities to grow and improve your skill set or your knowledge base. And you know, talking to my counterpart, the Quebec counterpart in Chicago, Jean-François Hood, he talks about that too, how it's always a challenge to, no matter how hard you try, no matter how aggressive you are in advertising for the position, you just don't get that many applicants. So my advice to anybody who's looking for something to really expand their skill set, to expand their knowledge base, consider these positions as they become available, not just in the Midwest, but I mean, they're advertised everywhere, on Indeed, on LinkedIn. You know, like, consider applying for these positions. I think that it's a very rewarding experience.
Thank you. All right, so you apply and you get one of these jobs. Sean, what does one of your typical days look like?
Yeah, so maybe before I just wanted to add that the Quebec offices are pretty similar to Ontario and Canadian consulates, as most of the team is locally engaged. Most of our employees are locally engaged. So for instance, in Chicago, we are a team of 15 people, and I think 11 employees are locally engaged. So the other ones are from Quebec, so it's a 3 to 5 year posting. So I would say, to answer your question, I don't think there's like a typical day, as you can imagine. And what I like the most about the job is that there's no typical day actually. But I usually start my day by reading the news and the press review, so both American and Quebec news, of course. And as we cover 12 states and we also cover many sectors, each and every day is different. So I would say that a typical day implies necessarily meeting with an American partner, whether it is with a professor, a chamber of commerce, or a city. But I also have meetings with Quebec partners, as this is part of our jobs to connect the right people together. So, and in addition, I'm in constant relation with my counterpart in Quebec at the ministry in charge of the Midwest region, as is the one like in charge of connecting with Quebec organization, Quebec partners. Also, a good part of my job is to send emails, unfortunately, or I don't know, but it's part of the job, of course, and follow up with partners on several projects. So, for instance, if we organize a conference or an event or a mission to Quebec with American partners, or if we welcome Quebec partners in the Midwest, so of course, we have to send and read a lot of emails. And we're also on the road. So as we cover 12 states, we have to meet with partners in person and participate in different events. And finally, I would say that I also write a lot. So I'm most of the time in charge of the delegates meetings and missions, which means that I have to write memos and notes for the delegate and for the ministry. And also, as I'm in charge of the communication aspects at the office, I have to write posts on our social media. So yeah, it's pretty diversified and it's interesting. This is what I like the most about the job. So we meet with different people, we see different things, we travel. So yeah, I love it.
Thanks, John. Aaron, are you still with us? Aaron,
I am.
what's your typical day like, sir?
I mean, I'll second John's point. Always lots of email, too much email. But I don't know if there's one typical day. It can vary significantly from week to week. Some of the examples of things that I really enjoy doing is when we get out on the road in our territory, getting out of Chicago. We interact politically with the state houses in our territory. So that would be in, Springfield, Illinois, Madison, Wisconsin, and of course, Jeff City in Missouri, where we meet with legislators to sort of advance our interests and issues. Sometimes we have concerns about some legislation that legislators are considering. So we relay those concerns, and I would say that I really enjoy the sort of interacting with U.S. elected officials. We also interact with members of Congress for the 3 states that we cover, and we interact with municipal governments as well, mayors and such. So those are things that we have a lot of work in Chicago, but we have a wider territory to cover. So we sort of plan visits throughout the year to make sure that we are constantly strengthening relations throughout our territory.
Thanks, Aaron. All right, I'm going to do a quick fire question to everyone on our panel, and then we're going to open it up to questions. I'm going to start with Carson. So the question for everybody is, if you were going to give one piece of advice on folks considering a career in international diplomacy, what would that be?
My advice would be to get creative with your job search. Most Americans, including myself when I first got started, assume State Department, that's the way to go. The reality is most people who enter the State Department as first-time diplomats do so at the age of 33. That's the average age. I am 24, so I am not 33 yet. So when I applied, I was eventually told that I didn't have enough experience. But the bright side of that is there are a lot of other opportunities besides just the State Department. So we talked about all the LES roles and opportunities there. But also for Americans, if you look at the US government, the State Department is fractured. So, of course, you have roles with the State Department, but there's also the Foreign Agriculture Service and the Department of Agriculture. There's the International Trade Administration, which is part of the Department of Commerce. Ironically, the Department of Interior also has people posted not in the interior of this country, but at embassies abroad. So there's a bunch of different government options. There's a bunch of different embassies and consulate options. There's a bunch of different nonprofits. There's a bunch of different international organizations. And all of those are opportunities for you, even when you graduate college right off the bat. When the State Department isn't available, a lot of these options are. So that would be my kind of advice.
Thank you. Earl?
Yeah, I'd agree with Carson. One thing I would add is flexible. Be flexible. It's okay not to live in Missouri or Chicago or somewhere for a brief period. These are great opportunities, great learning opportunities, great growth opportunities, and just, be diligent. Look at everything that's out there. When Ontario posts again, I expect to see at least a couple of thousand applicants for the next opportunity. But be flexible, be open to other possibilities, because these are great opportunities to learn, to grow, and to do some pretty fun stuff. I know Carson will tell you how much fun it is to work for Ontario, how exciting it is, and how I'm a joy to work with. I know Carson would say that, and he'll say it, but I thought I'd just help him out a bit. These are fun opportunities, whether you're working for Ontario, Quebec, the Canadian government, or any government. These are fun opportunities to really do something creative and diverse, and so just be flexible. I think that's and be diligent and make certain you look at everything that's out there.
Thank you. I will agree. I have the coolest job of anyone I know. Jean, what's your piece of advice?
Yes, so I would say that you need to be curious and be open-minded when you work abroad or in international relation. You meet with so many different people with different backgrounds, different cultures. So you need to be open-minded and to adapt easily and be ready to face many different situations. And personally, I always wanted to work abroad, so it was kind of a goal and a dream for me. But initially, I was not necessarily considering a posting in the US, but there were job openings in our office in the States. So I applied for the job and finally got the job. But so you have to be to be curious and to try new things. And maybe one more thing, if you wanted to stand out compared to others, I would recommend learning foreign languages. So I think to speak another language is sometimes, of course, a requirement for a job, but it can also be a good way to better understand a culture and to adapt to a new culture, a new country, if you're working abroad. And finally, I would also recommend doing internships. I think there's nothing like having boots on the ground. A big part of our job is networking. And I would say that you're never too young for networking, and practice makes perfect. So you can volunteer in a nonprofit organization or do an internship at the Quebec office or the Ontario office. So yes, that would be my pieces of advice.
Thank you. Aaron, words of wisdom?
Yeah, I think we've covered a lot of ground here, and getting back to Carson's point, like a lot of people aren't aware of just how many different parts of the U.S. government have people in other countries. If you're interested in criminology or law enforcement, U.S. Customs and Border Protection has people posted abroad, including in Canada. If you're interested in intelligence work, NSA and CIA are posting people abroad, and that can be super interesting work that you'll never be able to talk about. And yeah, there's also the consular aspect. of the State Department, which none of us do, but that's where you'd be helping Americans in other countries, whether, if they're in trouble, if they're in prison, if they've lost their passport. So that's a whole part of the State Department that exists. And of course, if you're interested in helping people from other countries, then you would want to look at USAID in terms of, doing work in developing countries and addressing issues like hunger and things in that area. I would also say that our Foreign Affairs Department is very similar to the State Department in that they really want to hire from a diverse background. They don't want all people with the same degree. They want different experiences. They want people from across the country. So yeah, I mean, if you're interested in pursuing a law degree, I can tell you that a law degree can be extremely useful in many different international work scenarios. But yeah, basically there's more than one way to do it, and you don't necessarily need to do it as soon as you get out of school, because again, governments do like people that have had a varied degree of experiences.
Thank you, Aaron. Thank you, all of you, for participating in this. We have a few minutes for questions, if we have any questions. I'm very amused that Aaron said that you should join the CIA and be a spy. I'm going to take the microphone over so our Zoom people can hear.
Hello. I heard through all of you that you travel a lot. Do you get, I'm probably going to not say your name, Jean? I heard that you have kids. Do you get to make it home at night with them? Or how does that work with traveling within your career?
Colleen, can you repeat the question? I
Sure.
didn't
She
hear
asked
part
about
one.
traveling and
Yeah.
heard that everyone travels a bit, and she's
Yeah.
wondering, with your family and your kids, how does that work? And do you make it home at night?
Yes, I would say that I'm very lucky because my husband is a stay-at-home dad. So of course it's easier for me to travel since like he takes care of the kids and pick them up after school. So yes, so I would say that I'm pretty lucky, but actually they're now older, so I would say it's easier for me. My son is 12, my daughter is 10, so I think they can adapt and they are aware that this is part of my job. But of course, even if I live for 2 days, it's always like, oh, mom, why are you leaving for 2 days? Like if it was like the end of the world. But yes, so I would say that if my children were younger, like 1 or 3, not sure it would be that easy. But since like I have a husband who's staying at home, I think it's easier. But also now with that we can work from home, I think it's probably easier for many parents that like one of the parents can stay home and work from home and can maybe take care of the kids, at least to pick the kids up at school. And yes, so, but yeah, it's not easy. But
Thanks, John. I see Chad going up to the podium, so are you pulling the plug on us?
No, there's a question that came from our Zoom audience. You talked a lot about the advantages of foreign service. Got to be some negatives, maybe just a couple of quick ones. What would you change about the job if you could? And I know you have something, Earl.
Yes, well, I work for the greatest premier in the history of the world, Doug Ford, and I love everything about my job. But just to get back to the travel component, we were in Toronto a couple of weeks ago because there was a large trade delegation from Minneapolis, St. Paul that came to Toronto, and we were there to work with them and had worked with them. Last week we were in Michigan because the Canadian Studies Center at Michigan State University had a policy forum. We're here. And I'm really happy to be here, by the way, at Missouri Southern State University. I think this is a great conference. And next week, we're back in Michigan, and then we're in Toronto. So I travel a lot. I live in Chicago, but I'm from Toronto, and people ask me, well, you must love Chicago. Well, yes, if I was there, because I travel a lot. From last April until the end of June, I traveled every week. Then I had to be in Toronto. So travel is a big component of my job. It's an important component of my job because I need to get out and meet stakeholders, build relationships. So I know that's the case with the Quebec office, and Colleen and Aaron travel a lot as well. So that is the biggest part of it. But look, it's an honor and privilege to represent Ontario in the Midwest. So I think it's a great experience. Obviously, it's not something you do forever, but in my case, I'm really happy to be doing this.
And maybe, yeah,
Go ahead.
Colin, if I may, yeah, I would add that I think like the Quebec government, as well as the Canadian and Ontario governments, are pretty flexible as employer. We can work from home, but in my particular case, like 2 days a week, I work from home, and also I think we have good condition, and we are a team, and if someone is not available or a kid is sick or whatever, I mean, my boss can replace me, my colleague can replace me. So I think like as employers, Canadian, Quebec, Ontario governments are pretty flexible. So I think for us, it's easier to do our job.
Okay. Disadvantages to the Foreign Service? And then we're going to have to wrap because I have another lecture to give.
I'll say from the LES perspective, because we are based in a specific office and we don't move around. The negative to that is the diplomats do move. And so, 1 year you may have the best boss ever, best colleagues, everything's working great. And then in 2 years, all of your colleagues change. And some of them may have different work attitudes, different beliefs about how we should be doing this, that, and the other thing. And so your entire job could change in 4 years based on what the goals of the new diplomatic staff are that are coming in. And so being flexible is a requirement to get through some of those changes.
Jumping in on LES, because we are LES, there's also a ceiling. I can never be the consul general. I can never have Aaron's job. I came in at this level. I didn't think I was going to stay as long as I did, but I love my job. So the opportunities for advancement stop. I could have chosen to leave, and then you can, career paths can lead in many different directions. And you don't have to stay with it. I happen to stay. I'm very interested to watch Carson's path. He's new to us, but I see ambitions. So I would say that is one disadvantage, but that's also locally engaged. I'm not rotational. I'm not in the Foreign Service. For some people, moving every 4 years might be a lot. When I was younger, maybe not. Now, I can't even fathom that. Okay, and we have to wrap that up. One more, Aaron, and then we got to run.
I would just quickly say that's the biggest challenge is moving. It never gets easier. And in my case, I've become very attached to the Midwest. I love it, and I'm going to have to leave, and I have no choice.
He's very sad and working on his Chicago bucket list before we lose him next summer. Thank you all for your time this morning, and thanks to our audience and our audience online for listening in, and have a great day.
Merci.